How often do we think about the hidden structures of power that dictate our lives? What if we told you that white supremacy is a lot more pervasive than you think? These unsettling questions are not just rhetorical. They're a call to delve into a topic that's often misunderstood, rarely discussed in depth, and potentially more influential in your daily life than you may realize. White supremacy. It's a term that might conjure images of extremism, but its roots and reach extend far beyond these overt manifestations. In fact, it's so deeply woven into the fabric of our societies that it's become almost invisible, operating behind the scenes, influencing decisions, shaping perceptions, and determining outcomes in ways most of us scarcely comprehend. It's not just about individuals harboring prejudice, but a systemic issue affecting us all, often in ways we don't even see. This isn't easy to digest, but it's essential to understand the world we live in. To grasp the effects of white supremacy, we must first understand its roots. In its purest form, white supremacy is a belief system that asserts the superiority of the white race over all other races. This ideology, however, did not emerge overnight. It's a complex construct that has been centuries in the making, deeply rooted in history and society. The origins of white supremacy can be traced back to the era of colonialism, when European powers colonized vast territories across the globe. These colonizers, driven by a sense of racial superiority, subjugated indigenous populations, exploiting their resources and labor. This was justified through the belief that the white race was naturally superior and destined to rule over others, a concept known as the white man's burden. Fast forward to the 19th century, white supremacy took on a more scientific guise. Pseudo-scientific theories of racial hierarchy were propagated, with the white race positioned at the apex. These theories were used to rationalize slavery, segregation, and racial discrimination, further entrenching white supremacy in societal structures. In the 20th century, the world saw the horrific consequences of this ideology in the form of the Holocaust, where millions of innocent lives were lost due to the Nazis' belief in Aryan supremacy. Post-World War II, white supremacy didn't disappear, but rather evolved. It became more covert, manifesting in systemic racism and racial disparities in areas such as housing, education, and criminal justice. Throughout its history, white supremacy has been championed by various figures, from colonial rulers to leaders of hate groups. They have used propaganda, violence, and legislative measures to maintain and advance their agenda, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to shape societies to this day. But remember, history is not a static page in a textbook. It evolves, and so too does white supremacy. Today, it exists not just in overt acts of racial hatred, but also in subtle, insidious forms that often go unnoticed. This historical context sets the stage for the current manifestations of white supremacy. Understanding the roots of white supremacy is a crucial first step in recognizing and challenging its presence in our world today. White supremacy isn't just about overt racism. It's more deeply ingrained in our systems and institutions. Let's delve into this and look at how it manifests in various sectors, such as the criminal justice system, education, and media. In the criminal justice system, for instance, racial disparities are glaring. Research has shown that black men are over 2.5 times more likely to be killed by police than their white counterparts. This, even when they are unarmed or not committing a crime. This is a clear indication of how white supremacy subtly operates, valuing white lives over those of other races. In the realm of education, we also see the pervasive nature of white supremacy. Schools with a majority of black or Hispanic students are typically underfunded, leading to poorer educational outcomes. This is not a coincidence, but rather a result of systemic racism that prioritizes white populations. Furthermore, the curricula often focus on European history and perspectives, minimizing the contributions and experiences of other races. This is another subtle way in which white supremacy is perpetuated. Moving on to the media, representation is a significant issue. In television, film, and news, white individuals are often overrepresented, while people of color are underrepresented or portrayed in stereotypical roles. This creates a skewed perception of reality, where whiteness is presented as the norm and other races are marginalized or misrepresented. This is yet another manifestation of white supremacy. In the economic sector, wealth disparities are stark. The wealth gap between white families and families of color is significant, with white families holding nearly 7 times the wealth of black families. This is not because of individual failures, but rather due to systemic issues like discrimination in housing, education, and employment opportunities. This economic disparity is another way in which white supremacy continues to thrive. In the political sphere, voter suppression tactics disproportionately affect people of color. Laws that require specific forms of identification, limit early voting, or purge voter rolls often disenfranchise Black, Hispanic, and Native American voters. These are all strategies that uphold the power of the white majority, further entrenching white supremacy. Finally, even in our everyday interactions, white supremacy can be seen in the form of microaggressions. These are subtle, often unintentional acts of racism that people of color experience regularly. They can be as simple as asking a person of color where they're really from, implying that they don't belong. These microaggressions reinforce the idea that whiteness is the norm and anything else is other or lesser. These examples serve as a stark reminder of the pervasive nature of white supremacy. They show that it is not just about individual acts of racism, but rather a complex system that privileges white individuals at the expense of others. It is deeply ingrained in our society, operating subtly and often unnoticed. But by recognizing and understanding these manifestations, we can begin to challenge and dismantle white supremacy. White supremacy isn't an abstract concept. It has real, tangible effects on people's lives. It permeates diverse aspects of society, impacting marginalized communities in ways that are often overlooked or misunderstood. Let's delve into the economic disparities first. White supremacy is entwined with economic systems, creating a structure that disproportionately favors those who identify as white. This systemic bias results in economic inequalities that have persisted for generations. For instance, wealth gaps between racial groups are staggering, with white households typically holding significantly more wealth than their counterparts of color. This economic disparity is not a product of individual failings, but rather a consequence of a system built on white supremacy. Next, we have health inequities. Studies have shown that racial and ethnic minorities often receive lower quality health care than their white counterparts. These disparities are not solely due to income or insurance status, but are also linked to the implicit biases of healthcare providers, a byproduct of white supremacist ideologies. Such biases can lead to misdiagnoses, inappropriate treatments, and ultimately, poorer health outcomes for marginalized communities. Lastly, the psychological effects of white supremacy cannot be overstated. Living under a system that constantly devalues your worth takes a heavy toll on mental health. Experiences of racial discrimination can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, depression, and other mental health disorders. The psychological burden of white supremacy can also manifest as racial trauma, a form of race-based stress that affects individuals and communities. To illustrate these effects, consider the story of Maria, an immigrant woman of color. Maria works 2 jobs to support her family, yet struggles to make ends meet due to wage disparities. She experiences racial bias in healthcare, leading to delayed diagnosis and treatment. The constant stress of discrimination affects her mental health, causing anxiety and depression. These impacts of white supremacy are not isolated incidents, but everyday realities for marginalized communities. They are the result of a system that privileges whiteness, perpetuates inequality, and harms those it marginalizes. Understanding these impacts is a crucial step towards dismantling white supremacy. White supremacy is a systemic problem, and it requires systemic solutions. The fight against white supremacy is a collective effort, and it must be waged on multiple fronts. It starts with education. Knowledge is power, and understanding the roots and manifestations of white supremacy helps us identify, challenge, and dismantle it. Schools, universities, workplaces, and homes should all be places where we learn about racial justice and equality, and where we challenge biased narratives and stereotypes. Then there's activism. a powerful tool in disrupting systems of oppression. Activism can take many forms, from peaceful protests and rallies to online campaigns to community organizing. It's about raising our voices, standing in solidarity with those affected, and demanding change. But remember, activism isn't just about the grand gestures. It's also about the everyday actions, calling out racism when you see it, supporting businesses owned by people of color, and continuously educating yourself and others. But these efforts cannot stand alone. They must be accompanied by policy changes. Laws and policies that perpetuate racial disparities must be changed, and new ones should be enacted to promote racial justice and equality. This includes reforms in education, housing, criminal justice, and more. Advocating for such changes is essential, and let's not forget the importance of allyship. Allies are those who leverage their privilege to support those who are marginalized. It's about listening, learning, and taking action. It's about standing up against racism, even when it's uncomfortable. There are numerous resources available for those who want to learn more and take action against white supremacy. Books, documentaries, articles, websites. Seek them out, immerse yourself in them. Use them to grow and to ignite change in your communities. Remember, combating white supremacy is a continuous journey, not a destination. It's about unlearning and relearning, challenging and changing, speaking and acting. Change starts with awareness, and each one of us has a role to play in dismantling white supremacy. We've covered a lot of ground today, but this conversation is far from over. We've peered into the uncomfortable corners of our society, tracing the roots of white supremacy, and examined its insidious presence in the present day. We've seen the harm it inflicts and explored ways to combat it. But this is just the beginning. The fight against white supremacy is not a sprint but a marathon. It demands constant vigilance, continuous learning, and an unwavering commitment to justice. It requires us to challenge our own biases, to listen to those who've been marginalized, and to use our voices and actions to effect change. This isn't an easy journey. It's fraught with difficult conversations, uncomfortable realizations, and seemingly insurmountable obstacles. But the destination, a world where every individual is valued and respected regardless of their skin color, is worth every step. Remember, confronting white supremacy begins with understanding it. The journey may be difficult, but the destination, a just and equitable society, is worth the struggle.